This is our wrap-up session in more ways than one. And Michele and I thought we would do a little reflecting on 3 years of block by block and see if we can learn some of the lessons that are there to be learned. And we're going to, about midway through this session, turn it over to you to do something similar. How many of you have been here for 3 years? Raise your hand. It's kind of 40% of the 50% of the group is good. How many 2 years? Okay. How many haven't been here at all? That's a trick question. Trick question. All right. So to begin, let's go back to academic year 2009-2010. I believe you were a fellow at the Reynolds Institute at the University of Missouri at that time. After a long career in daily journalism, which is where I first met you in the 1990s when you were an editor at the Portland Oregonian. And you had signed up to study what during your fellowship? Tell us about that first.
Well, I actually started the fellowship with the idea of studying best practices for community engagement in online news. But when I got to Reynolds, I stumbled across some research that had recently been done about sort of trying to figure out the new news ecosystem. And I found I don't want to oversummarize, but I found the research somewhat dismissive of online news startups. The design of the research to me was very newspaper-centric. If you weren't daily, then you weren't as good. If you weren't comprehensive, you weren't as good. And I didn't really know that much about you guys. Of course, I don't think many of us knew that much. But the journalists kicked in. I just said, that doesn't sound like the accurate story of what's going on. So I switched gears on the fellowship and decided that I was going to try to find out more accurately what was going on. And out of that came what became Michele's list, which was a list I put together of promising local online news sites. I had criteria for it. I was looking for sites that were working on all 3 legs of the stool. They had content, they were working on engagement and transparency, and they were working on revenue. And I had a research assistant. We looked at probably 1,400 sites. We went to all the lists, like the JLab list, and looked at all those sites. And about 125 met the criteria. And as we looked at these sites, I felt like, I think we're kind of seeing the front end of what's going on here. Maybe some of the more evolved sites. Because you can have, as you can have thousands of startups, but 2 years later, they're not all going to be out there. So that was the beginning of what became Block by Block, because the next discovery was that you folks mostly didn't know about each other. You didn't have any kind of network on any large scale for communicating with each other, for sharing what you were learning, and for sharing your struggles. So RJI, Reynolds, agreed to host the first Block by Block, and that's how that came about.
Okay, let's go a little bit deeper into that. The 125 sites that you found all had what things in common? Go over that again.
They were, actually I have to hat tip to Jay, because you helped me write the criteria.
Yes. I remember that. So that's what I want to go into.
Yeah,
so
well, they're very simple. I mean, they're basically 5 criteria, but they cover the three basic areas I mentioned. The content does not have to be journalism, but it needs to reflect the core values of journalism. It has to be evident that, it's trying to be accurate, fair play, like that. So, I did not rule out, sites that mostly rely on citizen contributors, for example. The frequency I set at, there had to be posting at least 3 times a week. And that was pretty arbitrary. I really didn't know. I just knew that daily didn't seem quite fair. So, and 3 times a week is held up pretty well. They had to be transparent. You had to know who was publishing, and there had to be some mechanism by which you could contact that person. They had to have enabled some mechanism of engagement online, and that was wide open. Commenting, even just the email, that was enough. So I wasn't trying to make it, this huge standard. And it had to be evident. We didn't have time to interview all the publishers. It had to be evident from the site that there was a serious effort to make money going on. And that's probably was the key thing, because what I've seen on some of the bigger lists that try to include everybody, which is great, a lot of, when you go to those lists and you look up the sites, a lot of them no longer exist, right? But my list, probably 10 sites have fallen off in 3 years. Pretty low numbers. So I think there's something there. If they're seriously working on revenue, they're going to be around. And that really shaped a lot of the thinking about this program.
Right, and another reason why that was so important is that in the background of this work was this really big question that is still out there. There's still the #1 question in American journalism today, which is, how do we sustain serious journalism as an economic enterprise? Which does mean revenue of some kind. It doesn't necessarily mean a for-profit business. There could be other constructions. It could be a cooperative. It could be a nonprofit. It could be a for-profit. But you wanted, Reynolds wanted, a lot of people wanted to know what is going to sustain journalism in this country. And it's very important to mention that, because ultimately that's what this group is about, right? It's local journalism that's real, and that's about the communities where people live.
Something I would add about Michele's list as well is it wasn't strictly a list of folks who became part of Block by Block. One of the things that happened with that list that got a lot of attention was, as I looked at the list at the sites more and more, I was able to categorize them in a way that reflected, if this is your mission, your revenue model might look something like this. So, the obvious, it wasn't super obvious even 3 years ago, but at the time was, if you're a nonprofit investigative site, your revenue is going to look like, foundations and donors. If you're a block by block, a very local type site, advertising is probably going to be a primary source of revenue. And it wasn't like I knew that, but it was more like, I think this is what I'm seeing, however it may evolve. But it ended up helping a lot of, I'm really proud of that, because it ended up helping a lot of people see what was really happening. So the categories were kind of the secret sauce that got it tweeted and, got people to look at it. But the end result was I really felt like, okay, now people know, at least for right now, what you all look like and what you're doing.
Yeah, another thing in the background there, to just comment on what you said, Michele, is that because journalism went through an extraordinary long period of stability and monopoly in the way it was organized in this country, about 50, 60 years of essentially the same model, what happened is you had several generations of people growing up in journalism who thought that model was not a model, but journalism, right? So then all those people who equated journalism with one thing then looked at this new ecosystem and said, that doesn't look like the thing. That's not journalism, you see? And to realize their error, they would have to go back way further than most of their careers actually extended. Now, that's one reason we have journalism schools, right? That's why you have universities, so people don't get trapped in the world that they grew up in. But the relationship between journalism and journalism schools is not as good as it should be. So I just wanted to point that out. How did the name Block by Block come up? Where did that come from?
It came from you, Jay.
Oh, that's right. Forgot about it.
He has so many ideas, he can't even remember them.
With that little nifty BXB hashtag, it worked perfectly. Okay, so what did you think would happen when we got all of those sites and the proprietors and founders of those sites into one room? Like, what was your expectation?
The first time, I don't really think I had an expectation. It was really, I knew there was this incredible, a lot of you had sort of discovered each other through the list, and, or, I was starting to do follow-up interviews and stuff, and, telling you about each other. And so I was just very focused on, wow, let's just get them all together and see what happens. I did not have well-defined ideas about what the publishers at that point in time needed, what expertise they had, what expertise they lacked. So it was really just, I just felt that there was this really powerful desire on the part of the publishers and editors, site operators, to be together.
And when we did get them together for that first time, what sorts of things in 2010 dominated the conversation?
I was thinking about that a lot yesterday, and I think I saw on Twitter a few of you who were here the first time were kind of reflecting on that. I think we did program in a fair amount about revenue, although not at the level of formality and expertise that we've brought this time. In the general session, I think we opened with a panel on advertising, and the comment that somebody remembered and tweeted, I think it was Howard, was at some point in the discussion, somebody just got up and said, let's just agree advertising is evil. And it was sort of like, I think what it was, the way I think about it is the people there were very passionate about news, and they were committed to local community news. And they were mostly kind of starting to get their minds wrapped around the fact that they were going to have to do something about making money, but there were sort of points of resistance. The advertising is evil would be the extreme end. Some of it was more like sort of puzzlement about what that would even look like.
Right, which we still hear this year. I'm not a business person, but I'm being sort of pushed in that direction.
Yeah, there was kind of that recognition that was going to be necessary.
And there was also a lot more discussion that year compared to this about the basics of how you gather information and how you tell stories and how you serve a community journalistically. Whereas now I think it's much more about how I make this into a business. So that's my next question is, looking over the 3-year interval, 2010 to 2012, what are some of the themes that emerge from those 3 years? And if we saw it as a narrative with a beginning, a middle, and end, what would be the story?
Well, just to first kind of look at that chronologically, I think by the second block by block, people had shifted from, oh, I need to do this, to how do I do it, which was big.
Right.
It was very big. And, I conduct an annual survey of the publishers and ask them questions about revenue and how they spend their money. And one of the things that I put some of the survey results up, and the one that I highlighted was that on average, the publishers are devoting something like 65% of their resources to content. And I pointed out, since I've been tutored by Rusty Coates, that really generally the amount that you're spending on content should be roughly equal to what you're spending on developing revenue and marketing. So I was trying to make a point, and it's a point that from a block-by-block perspective, I mean, we've moved steadily based on our own opinions and feedback we've gotten to you in more and more into revenue. And you see that in this session. This block-by-block is almost entirely revenue.
Right. So that is a vector
Yeah.
over the 3 years.
I think another theme is, and this is all of us and everybody in this new digital world, is there is so much that we don't know. It's got to be this constant learning, trying to figure things out. I think I made some assumptions about what the publishers knew about operating businesses that it turned out that many of them didn't really know. And of course, I'm not a business expert, so, I was pretty clueless myself. But, again, that's kind of driven the programming block by block.
Anything else emerge as a theme?
I think a big theme for me, again, I'll be interested if we have discussion to hear from you folks, because I have a very sort of narrow perspective. I think a theme for me has been to try to each year to try to make block by block more diverse. And I want to shout out to Michele Ferrier for really engaging me in that. And I'm not just talking about diversity of people. I'm talking about diversity of model, diversity of ideas, how important that is that, you be a very open and inclusive community. I came out of newspapers, and for 20 years, while newspapers were getting disrupted, they only talked to themselves, right? They calcified. They were clueless. And, I know it's early in the game for you, but we don't know what the model is. We know there's probably going to be more than one. So, that's sort of been my thing with block by block, is how do we get more different ideas into the mix? And how do we get people who are not doing the exact same or very similar kinds of sites, how do we bring them together so they can all grow and learn from each other?
After the first year, Patterson became involved.
Patterson was involved in the first year.
They were?
Yeah. So
what's their stake in this? I mean, why do they care?
I think that they were they were interested in doing something in journalism, and they had engaged Janet Coates to kind of help them figure that out. And Janet and I had connected during that first year because she was also studying the community news ecosystem and trying to kind of figure it out and help Patterson figure out what they might do. I think that, again, Janet's sitting right there, but I'll speak for her a little bit. I think there were a couple things. I think that Patterson was very interested in community engagement and saw, the community and the highly local sites as an area where a lot of engagement and experimentation around engagement was happening, and really wanted to foster that and support that. I think Patterson wanted to help a group that nobody else was helping. I think, and most of you folks are not the model that, a typical foundation is going to look at. And so I think that was very, very significant.
You're saying these people aren't sexy?
Right.
Is that what you're saying? Because I would disagree with you.
I'm saying the for-profit
about
issue.
that.
I'm saying the for-profit issue. It's
Totally.
not. A lot of foundations are doing a lot of great work in this field. It's absolutely, but foundations, in my experience, tend to gravitate towards the nonprofit. That's sort of what they know. So, this was really significant that Patterson was like, well, we want to work with for-profit and nonprofit. We want to work with the entrepreneurs.
Along those lines, one of the things that really interests me about this group, one of the reasons that I wanted to come to these events and help out in the small way that I have, is that it goes back to something that happened to me in the mid-'90s when I was involved with people like yourself and Janet in trying to get newspaper journalists to engage with the community more. And I remember sitting in some godforsaken hotel ballroom somewhere in flyover country with a bunch of newspaper editors, and they were complaining about how hard it was to hang on to young reporters because they leave. And so I asked them, well, do you pay reporters enough to own a home? And they all kind of look at their feet and shuffle. Hello? And of course, the answer was they didn't. And it illuminated something for me that has ever since helped me to organize my thinking about journalism, which is that if you are reporting about a place where you live and your life is rooted, that is a completely different journalistic act than reporting for a place that you happen to be passing through. Because, right? And those are different acts of journalism. They come from a different place, and it's not just that they would have a different ethic. There's a different, I think the difference is almost spiritual. And so what has always interested me about this group is that it's not just news, journalism, business model, replace the Cumberland Press. It's that spiritual dimension of this is news for the place where I am invested, where my kids go to school, where I own a home, where I live, where I want to continue to live. And when people in this group talk about, and then I had to decide, should I quit my job, and do this full time, that is also almost like a spiritual kind of commitment, because it's investing yourself even more in the welfare of the community through journalism, which is why a lot of people got into journalism. Whereas, let's just sharpen the contrast a little bit. The young reporter who's in Bozeman, Montana, but really wants to be in Denver next, and then after that, Washington, is going to do the journalism in Bozeman that gets him out of Bozeman. Right? I mean, it's just an incentive structure for that. And that kind of journalism actually can be quite damaging. So that's what brought me to this place. Another question about this 3-year interval. What's been the joy of it?
The joy for me has been seeing all together. Just talk. I mean, it's been very interesting each time, during breaks and, anytime there's an opportunity, it's just all the voices. You guys are all talking to each other. That's the joy for me.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. It's when Billy says to Judy, "Can I ask you about that thing you said?"
Right.
And like, "Oh, sure, we'll talk later." Like, to me, that's actually the conference.
Right.
And the program is just an excuse.
Right.
To get people to actually.
Yeah. And that's really fed into how far you've all come. How far the group has come over the 3-year arc. I mean, I was saying that the first year it was sort of like, I've got to do this, and then it's how I do it. And the level of knowledge that I've sort of seen in the room this time, expertise about, progress on how to be a business, and how to adapt with the tech is quite remarkable compared to the first block on block.
What's been the frustration?
I don't know that there's any frustration
Yes,
per
there
se.
is.
I think there's a concern. There's a big concern that you folks have started to self-organize. And if you want to continue this, you've got to self-organize, because it's not going to be done for you any longer. And so my concern is, are you going to be able to do that? I think there's been some progress in the last year. I wish there had been more progress. I wish that was much farther along. The other concern I'd express is, I would go back to what I was saying about inclusion. I think that, as you all think about how you organize yourselves and what you want to do, I think there's a temption. A lot of my work is in organizational development and organizational culture, so I've got that kind of overlay on it. But, I think that you folks, as part of this process, I think there's a lot of feeling like, we want to stand up and show people who we are, which is great. But I think that's also kind of limiting in the sense of, having that inclusivity. So, if you want to tell people you are, one thing, that can be really limiting. I don't know if I'm being too
So
clear on that.
who or what should not be excluded from that self-organizing?
Well, I'm not sure I have an idea of any one thing. I think that, I would go back to my criteria. I think, and I would go back to, like the acronym of LION is a great example. Local, online, independent. I think those are really, the essential qualities. I would be really careful not to define news too narrowly. I think that, I'm an old newspaper journalist, so I can say this. It's like, news and information are bleeding together in this new universe. So having some definition of news that is based on what I'm used to seeing and what I used to be creating as an editor at newspapers. I'm worried that can be a really big potential limitation. I think that a lot of the innovation I'm seeing is on sites that are more focused on, what we would look at as information. To a certain extent, I think my theory is some of those publishers don't have some of the hang-ups that we journalists do, and I'm one of those. I'm talking about my own tribe, so I feel like I could say that.
Yeah. One of the more interesting developments in the 3-year interval for me was to see how we started to find the emergence of sites that were local divided by niche, right? So New Jersey food is local divided by niche, right? Susan's Oakland local, it's Oakland, but it's also got 4 or 5 verticals, right, that are key to the site. Social justice is one, I think, and what are some of the others?
Food, environment, gender and identity.
Okay, so that's what I mean, right? It's local, but it's further sliced into some key niche areas that drive the site, and I think that's a fascinating development, and certainly inclusion would include that. Okay, so now we're getting to the point where we're putting a punctuation mark on block by block, and we don't want it to be a full stop period. We want it to be more of an ellipsis, right? So what's it going to take from here to carry this work on? Patterson has been very generous. Janet and her colleagues have been spectacular in supporting this group. Reynolds did a really important job as well, as we see from the staff here and the infrastructure to record it. And you've been the hero of the effort. So all of those things are saying, it's kind of poignant in a way. You're on your own, right? Or not completely on your own, but it's now up up to you. So that's sort of the open question, right? The answer's not going to come from the podium. So we have about 25 minutes now where those who've been here for 3 years can reflect on those 3 years. What's the beginning, the middle, and end, or what are some of the key lessons? And those who have ideas for carrying this work forward can also get up and speak. So, who wants to start us off? And don't forget your mics. As you think back to 2010, David.
Jay, I actually wanted to reflect on your excellent comment, putting this into the context of, you know, where are we in terms of the sustainability of the reporting profession? And I think that's really important. But I would like to say, and this is building on something else you said, that in many ways, what some of us are doing is something that's never been done before. So in my community, there never was a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week news source. There were weekly newspapers. There was the daily that occasionally covered the town board, but there was never a 24-hour-a-day news source like this that would engage the community in the way that we're doing it. So I would put us in a little different boat. And you sort of made this point, but I would boil down what we are to 2 words. The reporters from somewhere else write about our communities. We write for our communities.
Yes, in the back. I don't know your name, sorry.
I know, God. Hi, I'm Lisa Scooby. I'm with the Journalism Accelerator. Thanks, Rusty. I've been here over the last 3 years, and we've been really working to support sustainability with these local publishers. Michelle's referred to us kindly as a sister organization, because a lot of our work has really been in conversation with a lot of the people in this room and others across the space of journalism. We have been amazed by the growth of this community and the kind of scrappiness and the kind of resourcefulness. And many of the people in this room, having been here for 3 years, is a case in point. So a lot of the amazing progress and a lot of the different types of techniques and things that folks in this room and across journalism, investigative, and we look at legacy, we look at broadcast, we look at what's happening in radio, and we bring in outside expertise as well across the business space. There's a lot of incredible news streams that are emerging, and we really encourage the room to come to Journalism Accelerator. There's almost 300 resources on the site for you guys to access. There are conversations underway in an ongoing way around those resources to actually vet if they're working for you or not. We're having a conversation coming up at the end of the month about ethics and conversation. We would love to invite you guys to join us in that. And it seems that this is a community that's just beginning, and we're really excited to share that journey. So whatever we can do to continue to support you guys and our resources, please let us know. Handouts are on the table as well if you'd like to know more about the Kent State, Poynter, the Civic Commons, and Journalism Accelerator collaboration coming up around this ethics and conversation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Who else wants to reflect?
It's going to be important to bring the conversation back to what do these guys need to do next, but just to put things into some bit of a historical context, I thought it was interesting that Jay mentioned the event you were at in the 90s. One of the things that I reflect back on about my work in journalism and sort of where the world is now and where newspapers went wrong or where journalism went wrong is a project that Jay was involved in the 90s called citizen journalism. It had a lot of different terms. Civic journalism. I was involved in a few projects in Maine around civic journalism, so I was aware of this. Became hugely controversial among newspapers because the concept was to allow the local community to guide coverage and to figure out what's important. And you know, people talk about the original sin of giving away free newspaper content, to me that, we're talking about the real original sin there that enables what's happening here to happen, which is that traditional media sort of gave up that idea of serving the community, and there's a vacuum that you guys are stepping into.
Yes, well, you're now talking about events that were very important to me, and I wrote a whole book about them. But what we were trying to say back then, Michele was part of it, Janet was part of it, was you're losing your connection to the community. You're losing the thread. And this is a wake-up call for you. And mostly what the profession of journalism said back to us was, oh, so you mean advocacy journalism? No, that's not what I mean. And we sort of went back and forth like that for 10 years, and I wrote a book about it, and it was very frustrating. However, the work goes on. Yes?
Michele Ferrier, Locally Grown News. First, I want to kind of acknowledge some of the legacy organizations that have participated in kind of bringing us to Block by Block. I've been here for 3 years, but before those 3 years, the Knight Digital Media Center, Journalism That Matters, the RJI Collaboratory are all organizations that have seeded the ground in the work that we've done here at Block by Block over the past 3 years. So I just wanted to acknowledge some of the work that's been done before this to bring us to this point and to the formation of the local independent online news organization. So thank you to those folks. Lessons learned from all of those efforts, having been in all of them, is that if we continue to provide news and information for the 20% of our population, we're going to continue to disenfranchise the 80% of our population that doesn't have access to our news and information. And if we create a media system, when we have an opportunity with the tools that we have to expand that through mobile, through news and information to diverse audiences. If we remake the system in the same way that the legacy media system looks like now, I promise you, in 15, 20 years, you'll look just like them. So make sure that we continue to diversify our efforts and reach down to ensure that the disenfranchised are part of the revolution that we're creating in hyperlocal news and information.
Susan?
Well, that's a hard one to follow, but thanks, Michele. I'll try. 4 years ago, there were a lot of people in the room, or 3 years ago, who said, thinking about starting a blog with my buyout or pension or unemployment money, and I felt really scared for them. And I think that all of us have crossed the bridge of saying, even if it started as a hobby, it's become a passion that I need to find a way to make work financially. And part of what I love about this community, unlike traditional news, is the willingness of people to help each other because we don't compete directly in local markets. So the Facebook groups, the meetings, now Lion, are all signs of people collaborating in a way that I think is very much contemporary and the way that the world needs to move to survive. Having said that, I think that we need a public relations campaign. There's a profound funding gap where too much money is going to the affluent news sites, too much money is going to corporate media, and too much money is going to projects that are pretty much run by over 50 white men. And while not all of us are nonprofits, I think we have to consciously make part of our effort telling the story of the impact of these kinds of sites, because as Jay eloquently points out, they have a level of authenticity and community commitment, but it's really the antidote to what Michele Ferrier is warning us about. The way we have diversity is that we empower people in local communities to tell their own stories. But we have to help make each other economically viable. So I think another thing to think about, way we can help each other, is how can we really do what the Newspaper Association of America did for so many years and commission all these stupid videos. We can do way better than that. But I think we should start to look at, how do we really make this more of a movement so that Gordon Burrell doesn't say it's junk when we all know that's ridiculous.
And just to add a kicker to what Susan said, I was astounded to learn that the Ford Foundation was giving $500,000 to the Los Angeles Times, to do what the Los Angeles Times has been doing for the last 50 years. And then another huge grant to the Washington Post for government accountability journalism. And to this day, it astounds me that a grant like that could ever be made, because it violates all the rules of grant making that I know of. If I said to the Knight Foundation, give us a grant so that we can continue to teach journalism the way we've taught it before, they would say, Jay, that's not what the business we're in, but for the Los Angeles Times and the Washington Post, it's a different story. Okay, yes.
And just a quick question. What do you think about Corporation for Public Broadcasting giving NPR $1 million for diversity reporting?
Well, it's a little different in that case because CPB is specifically created to support public broadcasting. The Ford Foundation isn't created to support newspapers. But the NPR stations are in a very difficult bind because their only future is to be extremely local, and they've never really been that local. They've been membership organizations to support Morning Edition and All Things Considered, and with a very small local programming component for most of them. And yet they think of themselves as highly local and extremely connected to their communities, but they don't actually do that much that's local. So and Morning Edition and All Things Considered are now going to be available through other means as soon as we have internet radio and cars, which we already do. So that's why that grant was necessary, to basically to preserve those institutions. That's what they're trying to do with those institutions. I'm not sure it's necessarily going to work, because a lot of those stations are not that community connected. However, if they begin to partner with organizations like these, then that might be a different story. Okay, other reflections and comments as we wind up here. Yes.
Andre Nada from the terminal in Birmingham, Alabama. It's 3 years ago, it was kind of weird being one of the only folks from the Southeast, so it's nice to see a bigger contingent here 3 years later. Second, I think one thing that does need to be thought about in the future is the number of folks who may have journalism experience but didn't necessarily come from a strict journalism background when they started their sites. For a lot of folks, even if they came from a journalism background, they're doing this as a level of passion and trying to figure out how to run it as a business. And one of the great things about having this network now is the ability to have that information and have those resources available to you, and be able to talk to folks about best practices and see which ones work and which ones don't. But I think that's something that needs to be really kept in mind as well in terms of diversity, is that it's not always folks who are coming out of journalism careers. It's 20-somethings and 30-somethings who are starting up sites because they have the coding experience and the passion to go ahead and tell a story about their communities.
Hi, Lon Seidman from Connecticut, the Independent Media Network. I just wanted to reflect. I've been spending most of my life as a business person, not as a journalist. So it's my first year here. We've been wandering in the desert in Connecticut, and it's nice to see some friendly faces here that have been going through a lot of what we've been going through. My business is a family company. We import gloves and safety equipment. And we buy a lot of stuff overseas, we put it in containers and ship it over the ocean, and it arrives here in the United States where we sell to smaller folks. We're a distributor and a manufacturer. And our business would die tomorrow if a wormhole opened up in China and you can push gloves in on one end and they pop out the other in New York. We'd be out of business. And I think that's what's really happened to the news industry, that overnight, the distribution model, the entire business, which relied upon making margin off of distribution of print, soon broadcast, has blown up overnight. And the liberating thing I see is that for all of us, we now are the distributors and the talent. People are coming to us in the same numbers they're going to the incumbent traditional media. And the most important thing for all of us to do is to build our own sites, but also to recruit. And we've been spending a lot of time doing that. When journalists are losing their jobs, we're organizing them, we're giving them everything they need so there's no excuses to get started. And the best way we can compete is to grow our numbers. And I hope all of you can do that, because we're working really hard to do that here in Connecticut. So just some thoughts, and I really appreciate being a part of it this last couple of days.
Yes, as my friend Clay Shirky says, publishing used to be an industry, now it's a button. Publishing used to be an industry, now it's a button. Click, publish, right? That's the point about distribution that you were making. Anyone else? Yes.
Virginia Citrano, myveronanj.com. The other big elephant in the room that we have to begin to address is the legal and regulatory framework that still favors the legacy publishing industry over us. In the state of New Jersey, as in many states, legal notices can only be published in a print newspaper with subscribers distributed by second-class mail. But a lot of these print outlets are going away. You know, they're not publishing 7 days a week anymore, but the revenue stream remains tied to them. And that's an unfair competitive advantage.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely something for a trade association to battle with, but yes, you're right, especially the printing of official notices. Yes?
Just a quick question. Is there any, on that, is there any progress been made in that? Are online papers in any states pushing for us to be able to do legals?
It has started. The push has started, but that's going to be a long-term thing. That actually goes back to the founding of the Republic. I mean, if you look at the history of the newspapers, one of the first ways they sustained themselves was through official printing. In fact, in that era, printing and publishing news were the same business. Other reflections? Yes.
First time I've turned the mic on. Hey, it works. I'm Justin. I'm from Capitol Hill, Seattle.com, Seattle. I think my favorite part of Block by Block has been watching the rebirth of news as a small business. I know there are a lot of other types of people here and entities here, but seeing how many people have, if not succeeded, at least sustained over the years, and it feels like there's more that are building pretty solid small businesses. So, I mean, if there's folks going forward and an effort going forward around that particular niche of small efforts to keep media small, that's the kind of thing I'm really looking forward to being part of, and I hope other people are too.
Hi, this is Lila LaHood, and I'm not going to talk about newspapers. I actually have a question I'll direct it to Janet and Vivian. I'm curious, over the past, since 2010, what has changed, and what advice could you give to, those of us who are nonprofits, or maybe some outlets who are thinking of partnering with nonprofits, about going to local community foundations? How has the conversation changed? What do you think are there any tips that you would give us in terms of making, stronger, more effective arguments to some maybe local family or community foundations that don't have as strong of a reputation funding this kind of stuff already?
Well, Lala, I would say that there's more awareness across the foundation spectrum about news as a public good, and that if you're a foundation that is working to try to make a healthy community, that this is one of the indicators of community health. I think trying to position yourself that way as a key piece of a healthy, functioning, vibrant community is the smart play. And I think there are more people who are open to hearing it from that perspective than there were even just a couple of years ago. I would add one point from the foundation standpoint that is kind of speaks to all of you and the conversation about what role foundations should be playing in journalism, and especially for this community. Eleanor said yesterday when she was talking about sales that you don't go to a potential advertiser and tell them that the choices they've already made in advertising are bad and wrong, because that's telling them their baby is stupid. That is even more true for foundations than it is for advertisers. Criticizing them over the choices they've made about how to spend what is, after all, their money is not a very clever approach to try to get them to be sympathetic to your cause. We can talk about Ford's choices, but those were Ford's choices, and they have their reasons for making them. I think that trying to focus on, I think it's important for foundations, especially local ones, to look to support specific sites and specific efforts. I would say to the folks in this room, and especially to the folks with Lion, that there needs to be a more coordinated case made to foundations about the need to support sustainability, education, techniques, tools, and efforts. That's where the difference can really be made. There's not ever going to be enough foundation money to hand out to everybody who wants to do this and keep them sustainable for 20 years. What will make a difference is if foundations come together and start working on ways to help create those business models and business practices that can help everybody over a longer horizon and not just one grant cycle.
And I think I might add to that, it segues into what I was going to say, which is that foundations, it's not in their nature or their long-term charter to endlessly subsidize a large number of sites. They have a lot of other draws on their money, particularly community foundations, because they are dealing with the whole health of the community and a lot of social needs and so forth. So it's not a business model to say the community foundation is going to subsidize a bunch of sites endlessly. But what you can go is to say we are in a transitional period where we're morphing from one to the other, and we're in a period of great danger with community information. If you go to the community foundation with your three-legged stool, you may not be self-sufficient now, but that you have a plan to get there, and you need bridge money and help to get from here to there. So that's much more persuasive to a foundation than to just say, gee, I do good work, subsidize me endlessly. And I think even the foundations like Ethics and Excellence that have been willing to support a lot of journalistic endeavors want to see that you're moving toward more self-supporting, because frankly they don't have enough money to support everybody endlessly in a subsidy framework.
Sorry. You didn't ask, but I'm going to join the conversation. The Knight Digital Media Center at USC just received $1.6 million for the next 3 years to help community foundations figure out the importance of news and information in their communities and what they can do to help foster increased connections with communities. So in other words, I'm in a position as a marriage broker of sorts. If we can find a way to communicate how what you're doing might work in a community where a community foundation understands the importance of news and information, as Vivian says and Janet says, towards their own goals as a foundation. So, you know, get on our newsletter and we'll be reaching out to folks to let you know about whatever efforts we've got going. But there's a lot of effort like this going on out there. It's just you have also got to educate yourself about what's happening in your own community with the funders who care about your community.
Okay, a lot of hands up. Got to move. Yes.
Mike Lyons from West Philly Local. As this conversation was happening, I'm looking at the local indie online publishers Facebook page, and somebody writes in, officially jealous. I couldn't be there to meet you all. New to the group and online publishing. We'll be there next year for sure. And my question is, this is my first year here. I'm to understand that there won't be a next year for this. Is that correct?
That is up in the air, but Michelle, you might
So
want
I'm
to...
wondering if that conversation should take place.
Yeah, no, I think that's up to you all in this room. You know, significant financial and logistical support is ending. I mean, a number of institutions and people, including myself, made the commitment to do this for 3 years. And last year, we talked about it in the wrap-up session that this year was going to be it.
Anyone remember that?
For Reynolds and Patterson and Michele. So that's where we stand. It's up to you folks to see if you want to do this and figure out a way to do it.
Deborah.
I have an idea for a direction of conversation, and that is one of the things that we've done well is speed and covering breaking news, and we've used the technology. But I'm beginning to get interested in the slow news movement and wondering what we can add journalistically by, speed is something, like you said, the publishing the button at Twitter, everybody's beating us just on speed. And I just want to, I think it's just an important conversation to have. What should we be doing to go deeper and more meaningful and to slow things down?
I like that. Michele.
I wanted to echo the policy conversation that we started earlier. The FCC is looking at community information needs right now, and I'm involved with researchers across the country who are trying to respond to that. And I think hyperlocals are a critical part of that conversation. So, one, being more savvy about what's happening in the larger universe and how we as hyperlocals can impact that. The second thing is you as hyperlocals partnering with local educators that are in your community to have them help you do research about the value that you bring to your community in the news and information. You need to be able to gather that evidence so that we can take that to the larger policymakers and show not only policymakers but community foundations the results that you're actually demonstrating in your communities. So both as an entrepreneur and an educator, I ask that you partner with your local institutions and find faculty there that might be willing to help you document the work that you're doing so we can use that as evidence-based research.
If I could just ask a dumb question, it's come up, well, what's going to happen next year? Is there going to be a conference? The people who are organizing Lion, I haven't heard from any of you to say, yes, that's one of our first priorities. Isn't that, I mean, shouldn't Lion be planning a conference for next year? Why is this kind of up in the air here in the conversation?
Dylan, hit the mic.
Mike?
In our board meeting last night, we spent 2 hours talking about how to keep this going. That is one of our highest priorities. We realize how valuable this has been, and we really want to see this keep going.
Okay.
In addition to, sharing best practices online, getting us all together in this room where we get to meet and actually know each other and trust each other and care about each other. That's been such a boon to me, and I hope to the rest of you. That that's right at the top of the list.
One of the first things I would do is make a budget, find out exactly how much money do you need to get this underway, and then that figure becomes a way to make it happen.
To continue this and make it work, the character of the conference is probably going to have to change a bit. We're not going to be able to get everything fronted by foundations. Likely we're going to have to bring in vendors and have them, and it might be a little bit more of a commercial experience. But as we have all found, we're trying to run businesses. It's all about money. We're not sitting here like we were the first year with somebody standing up saying, I'm never going to take advertising.
Mm-hmm. Right. There was also the patch scare. Remember that? We didn't talk about that. That was like the first year or second year? First year. It was like, patch is going to sweep us all into the ocean. But it didn't happen. Yes.
Just from all the conversations I've had, and we were just in the how to grow up, you know, how to grow your paper or your enterprise into a business. I don't know does Lion actually, besides the Facebook page, if there's a website yet for Lion? Okay, lionpublishers.com, but I really think if there's a place that we could have some best practices, it seems like everyone is so busy, especially the smaller, you know, one person shops, a place where we can give advice or give ideas and share information so that it's not just coming together once a year, but it's some real hard information to help people grow, whether it's how to find an advertising salesperson, which seems to be a huge deal. But just kind of some best practices for starting an online newspaper for dummies. You know, that's something that this organization could really do to help turn a lot of the smaller enterprises into real viable businesses.
That's another one of our highest priorities, is figuring out a better way for us to share the best practices and ask questions. You know, on Facebook, that's really good for immediate things, but it's so unsearchable that once we've had a great, amazing conversation filled with good advice, you never find it again.
All right, I'm going to take two more, and then we're going to wrap this up. Yeah.
I was very proactive in letting people on the board know that I want to help. I want to volunteer. You know, if you are too, and I hope you all are, let a board member know before you leave here that you do want it to work, you do want it to be sustained, and how you're willing to help. And if you weren't at the reception last night, maybe all the board members could just raise their hand. So if you're sitting next to one, you could reach out to them. I encourage you to do that.
Right on. Yes?
I just have a quick process suggestion.
Mike?
I just have a quick process suggestion. I missed the board meeting, but I totally want to support this. I think it'd be great if Lion took a lesson from the open data movement and actually set up a wiki where people could publicly post their suggestions so that the board wouldn't have such a high pressure of having one person have to respond to everything, but there could be more of a community space for everybody. Something like a Facebook group, only less closed, is a great use for wiki software, and I'd be happy to help set that up if you guys want help.
Okay, a final comment? Anyone? Yes?
My name is Ben Bader. I'm DowneyBeat.com in LA County, and I think doing this for a year alone, it's like carrying a fridge. You need another person sometimes. You know, even though I hypothetically could lift a fridge, it's way easier if I can get my neighbor. And I think some of us, like, we're close by each other, 10 or 15 miles away, but we're intentionally, or not unintentionally, I don't know why we're doing it, but we're not talking to each other. And like, if you have a wedding to go to and a big story, I think we ought to be able to call each other and say, hey, can you cover this for me, and not be so protective of our own property. I mean, doctors do it, lawyers do it, they cover for each other all the time. And I think that going on what the other person said about volunteering and contacting the Lions group, I think we should also contact the people nearby us, you know, and really try to help each other. Big sales appointment, you can't make anything. I don't think we should keep trying this on our own. It seems impossible to me.
That's part of what Lion is supposed to be about. Okay, we're going to wrap this up. If you don't mind, one slightly academic observation. One of the things that really fascinates me about this group is how American it is. In this sense, the whole idea that there isn't a good news source for Charlottesville, Virginia, I think I'll start one, is incredibly American. In a lot of countries, people just don't do that. They don't just go and start things. But it's actually a way of life. It's part of the culture of the country, which is something that de Tocqueville observed when he came here in the 1830s. He has this whole chapter in his great book, Democracy in America, about associations. He says, it seems like all Americans ever do is form associations. And so not just starting your news sites, but also the idea of, well, let's start an association of news sites. Let's start a trade association, right? That idea that the government won't do it for you, right? Big Brother is not going to organize you. just like the doctors and lawyers helping each other out. That's like so completely in the American grain. So that's another reason that I'm here, because it's like, this is the best of America from my point of view. Now, some remarks to close us out, Michele?
Well, that feels like a really good setup, Jay, for what I want to say. I mean, good in a way. Segue, maybe I should say. You know, you folks are really inspiring to me. And, you know, I was in the newspaper business for a long time, and the newspaper, that world became very uninspiring to me. And I left. And I've actually been gone for 11 years. I left a while ago. I was, some of you know this, I was the ombudsman of the Oregonian for a couple of years. And that totally changed my thinking. I had contact with more than 10,000 people over that time period. And it totally changed my thinking about the newspaper and the relationship between the newspaper and its community. And after that, I tried to make change, and I realized that it just wasn't going to happen in that place, in that time, in that culture. It wasn't just the newsroom I was in. So, you know, when I found you guys, it was really big for me, because I saw that community connection was alive and well and had the potential to really flourish in journalism. And that really inspired me. So thank you.
Thank you. We are adjourned.
Please fill out the survey.